a TV star, a crocodile egg mission, and one mistake that ended in death. This wasn't just another crash report, it was the spark that exposed maintenance fraud, a cover-up, and even toppled a celebrity empire. You'd think this story came straight out of Netflix, but no, it's real life. And today, we're going to unravel the crash of Victor Hotel India Delta Whiskey, the mistakes that doomed it, and the shocking aftermath that dragged Netflix star Matt Wright into a courtroom. Let's start with the people at the heart of this. Chris Willow. Wilson was just 34 years old. A father of two, he was the co-star of Outback Wrangler, and later Netflix's Wild Croc Territory. If you've seen him on screen, you know, he was full of energy, charismatic, the kind of guy people naturally rallied around. Willow wasn't some reckless stuntman either. He was a professional doing dangerous work in one of the most unforgiving parts of the world. The man flying that day was Sebastian Robinson, only 28. He was young, competent, and passionate about helicopters. But fate dealt him a brutal hand. He walked away from this crash alive, yes, but paralyzed, with his entire future torn apart in an instant. And here's something that makes the story even crazier. Just days before this accident, Sebastian had already dealt with an emergency landing in another helicopter. He admitted it rattled him. Think about that. He had already stared down engine failure once, and now he'd be forced to fight through another one, with far worse consequences. And then there's Matt Wright. Born in South Australia, he built a reputation as a tough-as-nails mustering pilot, crocodile wrangler, and eventually a TV star. By 2022, he had 500,000 Instagram followers and was being promoted by the Northern Territory government as a tourism ambassador, almost like the next Steve Irwin. His TV brand thrived on danger and adventure, but behind the glossy image, the helicopter operations he oversaw were walking a very fine line. This wasn't some illegal back alley job. The mission was totally legal, collecting crocodile eggs for luxury leather farms, supplying brands like Hermes. But here's the thing, nobody tells you until you start digging. Crocodile egg collecting by helicopter is one of the riskiest missions you can fly. You're low, you're slow, you're in remote terrain, and you're carrying a human being on a rope slung 100 feet under the aircraft. There's almost no margin for error. It looks insane because it is insane. And on February 28th, 2022, all of those risks finally caught up. Now here's where things start to go sideways. That morning, 3 helicopters departed Darwin for the crocodile nests out in Arnhem Land. They stopped at Mount Borrowdale to refuel. Simple, right? Except this is where the confusion that doomed Victor Hotel India Delta Whiskey began. Witnesses gave totally different stories. One swore they held the fuel hose for Sebastian's helicopter. Another said they didn't see it get refueled at all. Then one changed their statement later, saying Willow might have topped it off. It was a mess. If you're thinking, how can professional pilots not know if they fueled or not, you're not alone. But the evidence doesn't lie. After the crash, investigators found only traces of blue 100 LL Avgas in the wreck, but the drums at Borrowdale were green 130, higher octane fuel. And here's the kicker. There was no sign of a fuel spill at the site. No ruptured tanks, no dead vegetation from leaked gas. In other words, the aircraft almost certainly never got refueled at Borrowdale. The Australian Transport Safety Bureau, the ATSB, called it clearly Victor Hotel India Delta Whiskey likely left without topping up, and the pilot never picked up on the fuel running down until it was too late. And that's the real punch in the gut, because in chaotic multi-helicopter operations, it's surprisingly easy to assume someone else handled it. But in aviation, that assumption can kill you. Fuel management is one of the most basic black and white rules, and ignoring it is unforgivable. So here's what happened next. They made it to King River. Wilson was lowered on the 100-foot rope to start collecting eggs when the R-44 engine coughed and quit. Fuel exhaustion. Now put yourself in Sebastian's shoes. He's already rattled by a prior engine scare. He suddenly has a man hanging from the belly of his helicopter, and he knows he has seconds to react. He chose to release Wilson from the rope, but he released him from too high. And that's what killed him. The fall should have been survivable if he'd been closer to the ground. Instead, Willow hit terrain and died instantly. Sebastian then tried to auto-rotate. That's the helicopter version of a glide. But here's the problem. To pull off a successful auto-rotation, you need altitude, speed, and rotor RPM. That combination is what pilots call the buckets of energy. Lose the engine too low and too slow, and you're in what's literally called the dead man's curve. And Sebastian was smack in the middle of it. His rotor energy bled off too quickly, and when the helicopter slammed into the ground, there was nothing left to cushion the impact. He lived, but with catastrophic spinal injuries that left him paralyzed. And here's the detail almost nobody talks about. Toxicology found residual cocaine metabolites in Sebastian's system. Not enough to say he was high during the flight, but enough to raise questions. Post-cocaine exposure can cause fatigue, depression, inattentiveness, the kind of subtle human factors that make a difference in high-stakes situations. I'm not saying it caused the accident, but when you add it to the picture, a rattled pilot, questionable decision-making, and missed warning signs, you see this wasn't just bad luck. It was a chain of poor fuel management, human vulnerability, and unsafe procedures colliding at the worst possible moment. Here's the part that really frustrates me, because the crash itself was tragic, but the safety system around it, practically non-existent. Hellebrook, Matt Wright's own company, had a formal safety management system on paper, but in practice, it was ignored. Their manuals explicitly said egg collectors should never be slung higher than 5 meters above the ground. 5 meters is about tree height, survivable if something goes wrong. But what did the pilots actually do? They normalized flying way higher. They even went so far as to tear out the safety pages from the manual. That is the definition of reckless normalization of risk. And it wasn't just the company. CASA, Australia's version of the FAA, handed out exemptions for this kind of work without any structured risk assessment. No clear height limits, no exposure limits, nothing. In other words, regulators essentially said, go ahead, do this extremely dangerous job however you see fit. Later investigations revealed that some CASA board members had ties to the very crocodile farming industry that benefited from these egg collections. Talk about a conflict of interest. This is the real problem here. When you're out in remote regions like the Northern Territory, regulation often bends under political and economic pressure. You've got business interests pushing one way and safety standards quietly eroded the other. This crash ripped the cover off that uncomfortable reality. Now let's talk about maintenance, because this part makes the whole story even uglier. Victor Hotel India Delta Whiskey had just come out of maintenance. Cylinder work, a magneto change. But the paperwork? Sloppy, inconsistent, barely traceable. This is Aviation 101. You don't cut corners on maintenance records because it's literally what ensures your machine is airworthy. But it gets worse. In the Northern Territory, there was a widespread practice known as popping the clock. Tampering with the Hobbs meter so the hours recorded were less than the hours actually flown. Why? Because helicopters like the Robinson R-44 hit mandatory overhauls at specific time limits, and overhauls cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. By under-recording hours, operators could delay those expensive overhauls and squeeze more flying time out of the machines. The ATSB stopped short of blaming that practice for this specific crash, but they made it crystal clear. This culture of corner cutting was alive and well across the industry. And here's another detail that just blows my mind. This helicopter didn't have an emergency locator transmitter installed. That's the little beacon that tells rescuers where you are when you crash. Without it, the search took longer, and Sebastian's survival odds dropped dramatically. That's not just bad luck. That's systemic negligence. So, let's call it what it is. This wasn't one young pilot screwing up. It was an industry that tolerated, even normalized, shaving corners, ignoring paperwork, and relying on regulators who didn't have the teeth or the will to stop it. Now, here's where the story turns from tragedy to scandal. When the helicopter went down, Matt Wright and his allies didn't just grieve, they scrambled. According to court findings, Willow's phone was literally thrown out of a helicopter into the ocean to destroy evidence. Wright himself allegedly deleted notes from Sebastian's phone while he was in the hospital. These weren't rumors, these were actions that landed people in court. The legal fallout was massive. In August 2025, Wright was convicted of 2 counts of attempting to pervert the course of justice. He's still appealing, but the guilty verdicts stand. His co-accused, ex-police officer Neil Mellon was jailed, though part of his sentence was suspended. Another pilot, Michael Burbage, was fined for destroying Willow's phone. The picture that emerged was clear. There was a concerted effort to cover up, to protect reputations, and to avoid liability. But it didn't stop there. Willow's widow, Danielle, launched lawsuits against both Hellebrook and CASA. CASA, desperate to protect itself, countersued Wright to shift the blame back on him. On top of that, Wright sued his insurers after they refused coverage, arguing that the sling operations weren't properly disclosed in the first place. It became a legal circus. The consequences were devastating for the industry. Hellebrook collapsed. CASA had to revise its exemption processes. Insurers got tougher, demanding stricter compliance before covering helicopter operators. And Matt Wright? His reputation collapsed. The man once celebrated as the Outback's wild hero became a convicted felon, his company gone, his public image in tatters. And you know what? It wasn't just the crash that destroyed him, it was the cover-up. Just like in so many scandals, the accident might have been survivable for his career, but the lies and evidence destruction, that's what buried him. So that's the story. A fatal mistake, a broken system, and a cover-up that ruined lives. If you found this breakdown eye-opening, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more deep-dive crash analyses, and drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear what you think was the biggest mistake in this whole mess.